Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Hello and welcome to the No Miki Show. It is Wednesday, February 9th, and I am so happy to be reporting to you from Buffalo, New York. Buffalo. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I don't know how many of you guys know, actually, more accurately, Western New York, because while I did go to high school in Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, I commuted from a 35-minute drive or something, or it depends because it's always snowing in Buffalo, so it could go up from outside of Buffalo. And I spent my formative years in the Western New York region. But you guys probably know Buffalo for other reasons. The Buffalo Bills are, I guess, really hot right now. If I knew a lot more about sports, I could tell you more, but I will tell you I had dinner last night, and there was a full-on fight at the bar at the restaurant between two very, very avid Buffalo Bills fans. This is such a Buffalo thing. They were getting into a loud fight over who was a bigger Buffalo Bills fan, and the other guy is more of a hockey guy. It's just like the most Buffalo thing ever. So I had to share that with you. But you also probably know about Buffalo for the reasons of the organizing that's happening on the ground in Buffalo. And of course, India Walton's candidacy for mayor, where she won the primary like unexpectedly. But right now in Buffalo, there is an incredible effort for Starbucks workers to unionize. They launched that, and it's happening all over the country. We talk a lot about labor on this show. I think what's really powerful about this is not just that you have workers organizing against a company that has tried to frame themselves as being more, socially conscious and supportive of workers, but at the end of the day, they're fighting just as hard against workers unionizing as the worst companies in the country, which really shows you there's no difference between quote unquote woke capitalism and regular capitalism if the goal is to keep workers down. Nothing liberates people more, of course, than being able to live their lives fairly and have just wages and good working conditions. That is a class issue. That's a racial issue. That's a gendered issue. That's an issue of immigrants, new immigrants to this country. It is a human rights issue. And let's not forget that. But also what is so beautiful about this is that Buffalo is, of course, one of those Rust Belt towns that has dealt with horrible shifts in the last, 40, 50 years. When I grew up in Buffalo, you drive by these dilapidated factories that had been abandoned based on the trade policies of the late 70s. Those are the trade policies coming out of the Carter administration. And the steel workers, of course, major manufacturing in Buffalo, lost their jobs. And it really depleted the economy, leading to a mass exodus in a truly beautiful city and region. So to see workers organizing in a city that used to have such strong union organization and factory workers, and probably what people would think of as iconic labor force, but to see frontline workers, service workers, which really is the workforce today, seeing folks organize and try to create a union and take on one of the most powerful companies in the world. When it comes to, coffee brands, I don't think there is one that's larger than that, is really wonderful, and succeed at it. So just something that they started organizing probably less than 6 months ago has, Starbucks workers across the country now are organizing in their communities, whether it's Memphis or Boston or Rochester. I don't even know how many at this point. The map, it just keeps growing, and it's really coming from the workforce. No other union is recruiting, and that's harder for a company to contain. It's one thing if they're focusing on one city that's organizing. It's much, much harder when there are shops all over the country organizing for fair wages, better hours, better health care. This is how you do it. So kudos, shout out to all the workers in Buffalo who are and everywhere else that are organizing at Starbucks and to the many other folks who are inspired by the Starbucks workers to do so in their communities, whether it's other coffee shops, as we've learned in Pittsburgh that's happening, or just other companies that you work for. This is how you do it. This is how we revive the labor movement, even without strong unions as to what they were before, even without the PRO Act, even without the legal, in a lot of cases, the legal ability to even strike. This is how we do it. So coming to you live from Buffalo on this lovely, snowy, overcast February day. This is the best time to come to Buffalo. Oh my goodness. As a kid, this was the month where you go, is it over yet? Is winter over yet? So what did I do? I decided to fly up to Buffalo for a couple of days and meet with these Starbucks workers. So thanks for joining us today. We have an extraordinary show. It is Solidarity Wednesday. You know what that means. Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, is going to be joining us a little bit later. But first off, we are going to be talking about, this is such a fascinating topic to me. So, there is a report out right now about vulture investors. What are vulture investors? What is happening right now with vulture investors? How does that impact your community? But we're specifically going to talk about New York in particular and maybe touch on Puerto Rico because it's happening there too. We are going to talk with Jesus Gonzalez, Rob Solano, and Alice Nascimento about their efforts to take on these bad guys and how it affects your community, whether it's housing or otherwise, just the cost of living in a community, talking about the weaponization of New York law by these vulture investors. And then later on at the end of the show, you may remember we had him on last year. He warned us. He warned us that the far right was trying to break apart parts of the left. We had conversations about how Steve Bannon was working and organizing across the world to co-opt the populist movements and even pull from left populist movements and use propaganda on social media to do so. Well, guess what? Reid Ross, who was right, is going to be on to tell us about what we've learned in the last year and where we might be going. He studies far-right extremism. He has been working on this issue for many years. He saw it happening much earlier than we probably are seeing now. And he is the author of Against the Fascist Creep. It is an intellectual history of the transnational far right. We will be talking to him in the second hour. I'll be right back after this quick little break. We're going to have a great conversation about vulture capitalists and investors. What are they going to do to you in your neighborhood? Welcome back to the Nomi Key Show. Okay, I love this topic so much, and I don't think we talk about it enough on the show. Maybe because I'm doing a documentary that touches on this a lot, but this is so fascinating because you guys have heard of disaster capitalism. I think we all understand what gentrification is, but I think there's like another level post-COVID with so many folks who've been fleeing, their cities because it's too expensive to live, and they're working from home and there's no need to commute. To many other effects of disaster capitalism and just an economy. So we're going to talk about how specifically vulture investors and capitalists are really weaponizing New York law to make more money, whether it's in New York or other parts of the world. Welcome to the show. This is going to be a fun one because we have three guests: Jesus Gonzalez, Rob Solano, and Alice Nascimento. I love this. Okay, so many friendly faces here, familiar faces. So guys, I'm going to try to do this because it's always hard to do it with this many people on screen. So feel free to chime in. Let's just do this like a conversation if that works. So we can go around the table and we'll start with each one of you and you can kind of talk a little bit about your work and then I'll ask a question. Feel free to chime in. It's okay. That work? Great. All right. Yeah. So let's start with Jesus. You're the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Center for Popular Democracy. And Jesus, let's just start off with like, okay, what are you doing and what is a vulture capitalism? What is the New York law that plays, makes this worse for folks?
Yeah, I can dive in a bit. Like first my family's from Puerto Rico on the west side. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm from the Center for Popular Democracy, which is a network of organizations across the country, 33 states, in Puerto Rico and in Washington, D.C. And so Alisi and others, our New York affiliates, including New York Communities for Change, Church United for Fair Housing, Make the Road New York, Vocal New York, have had corporate accountability campaigns in the past. And this is just like kind of a evolution of that. Like our families, after Hurricane Maria, have been forced to move. Puerto Rico is facing a crippling debt crisis. And we're just like, okay, what could we do from here? In solidarity. And so obviously there's like federal oversight on Puerto Rico's debt crisis as is, but in our findings, like as we're like kind of investigating ways, Alisi has been kind of leading the legislative angles, right? Discovered that, I hate to use the word discovered, we found out that New York state legislatures actually have reached beyond their borders because most of these debt contracts are negotiated on Wall Street. They're negotiated in Manhattan. And so, which means that they have to follow New York state law. And the lack of any oversight or structure has made it kind of a wild, wild west for sovereign debt contracts in New York, which, most of them are in Latin America, west side of the world. And then there's another half of sovereign debt contracts that are governed by English law. And so we're working with folks in the UK to think about replicating our legislative measures here. But I kind of just want to, I'm more of an ad-lib singer on the show. So I rather let the singers actually do the singing and I won't fake like I'm singing. And so I just want to kind of jump in sometimes.
Sounds great. I love it. Well, let's go to Alisi because that was a great setup. Alisi Nascimento, if I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, is at New York Communities for Change and a policy expert working on legislative aspects. So, whoa, like this is like mind blowing. Puerto Rico has this debt. Maybe we should start off with that. Like, what's going on with the debt, and like, why is this a crisis? Who are they paying? How does New York connect with the debt?
First, thanks for having us. It's very exciting for us to be here to talk about this. First, if you don't mind, I want to talk a little bit about how Jesus alluded to it, how we kind of came to this, right? Because at least as NYCC, and I think Rob with Churches United for Fair Housing as well, a number of our members are from the Puerto Rican diaspora. And I believe New York has the largest percentage of Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico. And so we normally, like, this is such a global issue, right? I mean, we're talking about sovereign debt here, and a number of experts that we've spoken with about this issue, they're like, wait a second, how is, like folks that are working usually on the state level and community-based organizations getting involved with this issue? And it's because so many immigrants from our communities are directly impacted by this. And like Jesus said, many of them have fled the island due to a lack of opportunity and due to complete economic devastation. And so NYCC, a number of our members kind of urged us to get involved and wanted to get involved in this since the debt crisis kind of imploded, right? Which was about 5 years ago. So that's kind of the lens that we come into it, really, from directly impacted folks. And what's happening? That's a very, very loaded question. What's happening? So Puerto Rico, the plan for restructuring was approved very recently. And the problem is that it imposes a number of cuts, right? So far, over 250 schools have closed. And I think Jesus can speak more about the direct impact of what's happening on the ground. But because Puerto Rico doesn't have normal bankruptcy protection, so even like hypothetically speaking, if you're a municipality, you can file for bankruptcy. If you're an individual, you can file for bankruptcy. If you're a corporation, we know corporations are people, right? Corporations can file for bankruptcy. If you're a sovereign nation or if you're a territory like Puerto Rico, you were not afforded those same protections. So when Puerto Rico declared that it would default on its debt and it was unable to pay its creditors, then Congress passed what's called promesa, and which was a type of debt restructuring mechanism, but one that imposed a control board that's incredibly undemocratic, that's not made up of any Puerto Ricans, and they are responsible for all financial decisions that have to do with the island, including negotiating with creditors. So you can imagine that folks who have no ties to the island are much less concerned about kind of the general well-being of the population. So what's been prioritized is the payment of debt to creditors at the expense of the needs of regular people. So, and that's why so many folks have fled, and then that's why NYCC kind of became involved in this fight. And Jesus and Rob, if you want to contextualize what's happening on the ground.
Really quick, like, because our family is directly impacted, we also found, like, Puerto Rico is like one case study because there's 1 million Puerto Ricans in New York. Right. Constituency matters for the New York State legislature, but there's like millions of other immigrants in New York State, kind of identical play by the vultures happening. In, like, one of the fastest growing populations of immigrants in New York right now are Ecuadorians. They have a growing debt crisis. Same thing happened in Colombia last year, uprisings because of austerity measures like school closures to pay back the Vulture Funds, who use the same practices in Puerto Rico. Same thing happened in Detroit.
I was just going to say Detroit, yeah.
And also the same players. And so before, like, when you're just like, who's, like, how much debt, let's audit, does that actually, these are the same players. It's not the majority of hedge funds. Most hedge funds want to get paid back money. And is also, is not the majority of, like, creditors. It's a small group that benefits off of no deals, like increased interest, beach grabs, hospital grabs, land grabs, so that's how it's kind of played out. So I'll just back up and pass it over to Rob and others.
Yeah, Rob. So you're the executive director and co-founder of Churches United for Fair Housing. Rob Solano. I love that there's this fair housing angle because I don't know if you guys know, I'm doing a documentary on the island it's about disaster capitalism post Maria. And I mean, every single time I go down, every, couple of months when I go down for an extensive period of time, it is jarring. I'll tour around the island. I was in Rincon, last time, like a few weeks ago, and the development, the fast shift in development and how fast it's happening is jaw-dropping. Like it's really concerning. So I'm glad that you're representing the housing situation, because this fiscal control board that responds to hedge funds basically and vulture capitalists. This is happening in juxtaposition as people are fleeing the island and people are buying property or developing. Is this all coordinated, or is this just sort of like how it plays out normally?
Oh, it's incredibly coordinated, and really, Puerto Rico, for some folks, may seem far, right? If you're in Bushwick or if you're in New York, it seems like a far place in your mind. We were born in Williamsburg, right? Our organization was founded in Williamsburg, and that could be something as a grounding example for everyone. Williamsburg 30 years from now, when I was born in Williamsburg, it's much different than it is today, right? So let's just ground that somewhere where you've been, right? You've been to Peter Luger's, you've been over the Williamsburg Bridge. You can physically see towers hovering over this community that never existed before. And really, that's only being built, not by the 1%, by the 0.5% of people who have money. And they able to do that in Williamsburg with all the laws and all the protection and all the government support that you can have. And it happened here at home. Imagine if they get to play in other countries where you don't have that protection, you don't have bankruptcy laws, you don't have any rules or regulations. So if they can get away with what they're able to get away with right here in our backyards, right? Our homeless crisis is the highest it's ever been in New York. our disparity from rich to poor, the middle class is gone in New York, right? So if we're able to do that here with some of the best legislators in the world, imagine what's happening. You can only now start to imagine what's happening in Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Ecuador, and Argentina. And really, I wanted to talk about the word vulture.
Yeah.
And Republicans and the right have really good terminology to make people sound better. There's a right to work state that sounds really good, but basically is a non-union tactic, right? Mm-hmm. They're calling their own people vulture. So of the 1%, they commonly call the other rich guy a vulture fund, like a friend. And they're saying, even in our crew, the Amazon, the Jeff Bezos of the world, even they're saying, hey, we're bad. We're like awful. And we do bad work practices, and we get your soap in 20 minutes to your house, and we break a bunch of laws to do it. But then we have a whole bunch of friends that are worse than us, and they're so bad, we don't even want to give them a cool name. We call them vultures, that basically prey on the dead to get money from them. So they're not even cool with them. So if we don't like the 1%, which most of us don't, they don't like them either. And I really want to get one big example, then we get into this presentation. For every dollar that they're borrowing over the borrowing, they're charging $900 sometimes on a dollar.
Oh my God.
This is a big example. If I lend you $1, I will eventually want $900 back from you. You couldn't even give me the dollar back. And now I want the $900 back. And I paid a penny to get the dollar. So the incredibleness of this escapes it. This is usually like a banking thing. These are usually like Harvard and Yale grads that get on the call and do this. What we're trying to do in New York is organizers from faith-based communities, from organizing communities like NYCC and CUF, are stepping up to this conversation to say, you're no longer going to hide behind professors, fancy spreadsheets. Alicia could speak for 7 hours and show you a 100-page report that I can summarize in a sentence, right? Vultures are picking on the dead and killing them off, right? And there's 900 pages to explain that and get to the point, which we're going to get to a couple of pages, which I think Alicia should talk about. But really, for your listeners today, this is happening in Puerto Rico. This is happening in countries that our families, our grandmothers, our aunts, our matriarchs of our family who protect us and love us came to New York for a reason. Mm-hmm. And right next to them are New Yorkers that are preying on their countries. And we have an excellent opportunity because no one's going to recreate Wall Street anywhere else in the world, right? This phrase that Wall Street will all of a sudden become in the Poconos is not going to happen, right? Wall Street is Wall Street and will always be Wall Street. We can govern that community right here in New York that handles 95% of the vulture debt. So we have an incredible opportunity to touch a law that hasn't been touched in over 100 years, to really do something generational. And I'm going to make Elise sound as really smart. She's going to go through over the PowerPoint. But I really wanted to, as we're going through this, they're called vultures for a reason, and they welcome that terminology, right? Like, yeah, we're vultures. This is what we do. So I'll toss it back over to the main singer today. To go
really quick to ad-lib we'll go to Elise. Rob is actually right. These are not like investors. These are like Harvard grad litigators that their main mission is to litigate for money.
Yes.
They're not trying to invest to make their main mission is vulture funds are kind of just their play is to litigate for interest and money and land grabs, and they're not like categorized as investors. And so I'll pass it back over to Alicia.
Yeah.
So just to kind of back up and give you kind of some context, right? So when you think about a debt crisis, whether it's Puerto Rico, whether it's Argentina, the Congo, Greece, right? A number of years ago, I'm actually currently in Brazil right now. I'm Brazilian. I grew up here in the 90s, and Brazil was in the midst of a huge debt crisis when we were also victims of vulture. So this is to say that no country is safe, right? And what generally happens is if, a country realizes that it's got you issued a number of bonds, and because of things like what Rob was alluding to with the interest, compound interest is something that's been used as a financial, a quote unquote financial innovation, a financial tactic, which is really just predatory interest. And you realize you can't pay your debt, right? So Puerto Rico realized that it couldn't pay and it had to default. So usually the financial markets go crazy when this happens. And the actual investors that bought these bonds and invested in the country freak out. That's the first thing that happens. And then they end up selling those bonds on the secondary market. So they sell them for very little. They end up losing money. They sell them for 10 cents on the dollar, sometimes pennies on the dollar, depending on the country. So, and then that's when the vultures strike. When that happens, the country has just defaulted. And then you ask yourself, who in their right mind would buy essentially kind of distressed bonds that belongs to a country that has no ability to pay it back? So that's when they strike. And so they buy the bonds on the secondary market. And in the meanwhile, the country says to all the creditors, hey, we can't pay you. COVID is a great example, right? COVID has significantly depleted the revenue stream of countries around the world. And we are in the midst of many potential debt crises. So we said, COVID, we don't have a lot of money. You have to understand this, that our financial situation changed. And most creditors will understand this, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't suck money out of something that's not there. What's the expression? You can't get money out of a stone.
Yeah,
you can't suck blood out of a stone. So most creditors will come to the table and say, okay, let's change the terms of this and let's restructure your debt. And the vultures say, no, because how am I, this is when they strike. How am I going to make more money? So they refuse to engage in any kind of negotiation. And then they go to a court in New York and they go to courts in England. That's where most of the sovereign bond markets are. That's the law that governs these contracts. And they say, I bought these bonds for 3 cents on the dollar, and I want you to repay me in full and pay me. And it doesn't matter if all the other creditors are coming to the table. I want my full repayment. I'm not going to give you debt relief. So they end up stalling the entire process because oftentimes these contracts, they're governed by unanimity clauses. That's what happens when you don't have bankruptcy protections. Wow. If you have a bankruptcy protection and you have to renegotiate your debt, you only need a majority of creditors, a supermajority, to agree to the terms. So if you have a vulture who says, no, I don't want to, it doesn't matter, he's out. That's what bankruptcy gives you, with a number of other stipulations as well. So these countries end up becoming victims of this in the sense that these crises go on for a long time. Argentina, I believe it went on for about 15 years. Over 90% of creditors agreed to move forward. 8% didn't. Paul Singer, who is a pioneering vulture investor, was one of those people. There was a protracted court battle. Argentina was in an economic depression during this time. It had no access to capital markets. Ultimately, it was a decision by a federal judge interpreting New York state law that allowed Elliott Management, or Paul Singer, he bought $140 million worth of Argentinian bonds. And Nomiki, guess how much he walked away with? $140 million investment.
I don't even know. I don't even...
2.3 billion.
Oh my God.
2.3 billion. And it was a New York state judge interpreting New York law because there is no law that governs these kinds of transactions. So what we're trying... Go ahead.
Perfect segue, because you mentioned one of the players and the game to pivot to Champity. I just wanted to quickly say, New York State, usually New York, as we're speaking to New York State legislators, they're like, this is international. How does this impact us? Go to Congress. Some heads don't know that. They haven't said this, but they, are surprised that New York State has some purview to these New York State governed contracts. And so really, I really hope that they respond to our call to do what's right. These predatory practices have had real impacts. Hundreds of schools closed in Puerto Rico.
Yes, of course.
In the Congo, I think it's taken them, they had to take away nutrition programs
And this is because, just so folks understand, this is because the Fiscal Control Board has put people in the island in debt so much that the money is not going, things are being starved, and it's not going to schools, it's not going to infrastructure, it's not going to hospitals, it's not going, and they're rising, the tuition costs. Because the tax money is
in other places.
Exactly.
Puerto Rico's like one example. And I think what we've been trying to do is we call them vulture funds and clip their wings as much as possible so that to prevent future practices. And so we've also are looking at what's happening in Puerto Rico. There's an existing current debt. There's oversight. There's some restructuring process happening. In other places, there's still no restructuring process happening, but the deal has been done in many places. And so what are other ways to deal with what happened in the past, restructuring that debt, and also prevent them from doing something in the future? And I think one of the things is a reform to the Champerty doctrine, and wanted Alicia to spend a few minutes on that, so that way before we wrap here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just gonna just to finish about New York state law and the fact that this holdout problem that we have if you're a minority creditor and you're able to hold out the entire process. What we're doing is it's a twofold kind of legislative proposal. One is the model law, which it's very simple. It would impose supermajority rule over restructuring procedures under New York law. So if you buy New York governed bonds, you know that in the case that a country defaults and has to restructure, what a supermajority creditor says goes. So out with the Paul Singers, out with trying to extract disproportionate payment and take advantage of money that should be going to, like you said, Nomiki, to public health and to basic infrastructure that's just being pocketed by investors on Wall Street. And Champerty, which is what Jesus was referring to, is a law that's been in the books for a very long time. It's actually an Old English statute. And it just says, it's very simple. It says that you can't buy an investment, you can't buy securities for the purpose of litigating. And if you recall what we're saying that vultures are not investors, they're litigators. Right. So it would completely cut at their entire business model. So we feel that, these two pieces of legislation are really intended to box them in and prevent this from happening to other countries around the world.
Can you just a quick follow-up question real quick? They may not be in the game of making money through traditional investments, but they've created a situation in which now investors go in and buy distressed properties for much cheaper, or take advantage of local tax laws that are simultaneously set to attract quote unquote business, like the crypto bros that are all moving to the island right now and may or may not be producing jobs, but it's a tax break for them. So, but that probably wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the debt crisis.
You're correct on that. There are ripple effects, and practices have it sets the tone and definitely has an impact on gentrifying homes in Puerto Rico, and yeah, I feel like the Champerty doctrine, what Alicia just mentioned, the change, there was a statute change in the law in 2002 or 2004. Very different New York State legislature, Pataki, Sheldon Silver, which were less likely to confront corruption. And so we're hoping, and so Paul Singer literally just kind of changed the law where the big players can actually sue for, can litigate on debt. And so we're just looking to reverse the two sentences in the law, and also strengthen it. And so Alicia has been getting a little going a little closer and looking at ways to strengthen the law and also just reverse this favor to the pioneer of hedge funds, vulture funds. And so we're hoping that if we actually get the Champerty doctrine reformed, then it will prevent vulture funds from making these deals in New York State for the sole purpose of litigating, and it could clip. No silver bullet in any of this. You all know very well the limitations of legislation and how it doesn't cover all angles, but we think this is a significant, would significantly decrease the amount of vulture fund practices.
So who do we need to call and lobby? I'm a New Yorker. I'll show up.
Let me do that, right? So you're angry now, right? You heard vultures are taking over our good people. Our next door neighbor is Puerto Rican, or our downstairs neighbor is 13. Oh, I'm that. And What do I do? Easy. You have a state senator or a state assembly, call them. Tell them you heard this podcast, you saw us on YouTube. Did you sign on to this law that will protect Puerto Ricans, not just Puerto Ricans, but everywhere in the world, right? So it doesn't matter what country you're in, this will protect you. We have the law on the PDF. I think that was just up. There's a couple of different versions of it. Just call your state assembly member, state senator, say, have you sponsored this law, right? And it's there. It's S99 and 82195. If we go up the next one, we're going to get a number for the chamboree, but there's capital gains tax, which is S2522 and 83352 in the assembly. And then the big one, this is the one I think is a little bit of a sword, not a silver bullet, but the model law, right? S6627 in the Senate and the Assembly 87562. I just shot out a bunch of numbers, but this is when you call your state senator, you give them the S for Senate, and you call your assembly person A. If that seems too hard for you, call us and join us, and we'll find out who your state senator is and who your assembly person is. This is where we're really good at, right? This is not trying to help the world and every single country. This is right here in New York. This is incredibly tangible. This is a law that should pass, right? If we're representing 99% of the people, right? That's a lot of state and elected officials that can support this law. It will make a significant difference throughout the world on how vulture funds behave in those countries, and can happen as soon as the budget is passed in March 30th, April 1st. So in literally a couple of months, we can change this historical global law and put it in effect pretty quickly.
And folks, the New York State Senate in particular, there's been a sea change there. So there's opportunity in ways that there wasn't before. Senator Janaris, are you listening to me? Assemblymember Zoran Mondavi, are you listening to me? I think they'll be fine. But I'm going to call their offices personally. I'm going to show up at their office.
I just emailed their office and we're waiting for a meeting. So if you could do it, that would be great.
Okay. I will show up outside. Happy to do so. This was super fascinating. I know it was a lot of information, so thanks for being able to do it so quickly with a little roundtable. But any final thoughts before we run out?
There's a website. Jesus, what's the website? So people
we'll put it up there too.
We'll put it up. But we have a website. We'll put it up for you all. But one last thing I do want to say is this is incredibly tangible. It's a lot to kind of process, but you can just simply call your state and elected official, and it will make a big difference. We're trying to create momentum. We're calling 20 elected officials a week. So if you could be part of that call and just call for us, will be incredibly helpful and will help the lives of millions to millions of people throughout the world.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you guys so much. This was a fascinating conversation. Elise, Jesus, and Rob, thank you very much. We'll have all your information up on screen and all the different places that we post our show. So go check it out and make some calls. And like you said, it can happen anywhere, really. I mean, I'm Greek. When I went to Puerto Rico, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what's happening where my family is in Greece right now. Can't afford to survive. So it does. It's very smart that you did this. Thank you very much, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back. It's Solidarity Wednesday. So you know what that means. That means I get up early. No, I get up at normal time, but I get up at normal time and put makeup on and join Benjamin Dixon on the Benjamin Dixon Show, which airs every morning. Is it every morning? I don't even know.
Well, except Monday. We're collectively taking Monday off. We believe in a 4-day work week right now. at least.
Right now. That's how when our show was daily, it was the same thing. Mondays were like, the meetings
It's a little
day. It's
flexible
fine.
there. Yeah.
The news will be there. And of course, you join us on our show every Wednesday to talk about, issues related to the movement, how to stay unified, how not to fall for traps that pit us against each other, what the right playbook is. And this thing has been in the news this week, and it's really catching attention internationally. In Canada, you may have heard that there are truckers who have been, I should say it's a minority. We had David Dole on, who's from Canada, who told us it's not really a reflection of the entire trucking world workforce, but there's a minority of truckers who've mobilized to the Capitol to protest essentially, COVID restrictions, what everybody else on the planet has had to face. And it's gotten a little testy, so much so that government has cracked down on them, probably in a way that I don't even know if we would do it in our country. But let's just start off with what are your thoughts on this? This is a little bit different, especially given all the supply chain issues, and we'll touch on that in a second. But what is your thoughts on just this happening in Canada?
Well, I think, just from that perspective, bigotry doesn't go away just because they're a little nicer, right? They have a reputation of being nicer. That's number one. Number two, it was something that you just said. I guess we were off air, but it's making it seem as if it is a labor movement. And I had not really thought about that until you mentioned it a few seconds ago. And that's really a deceptive move, but it's a really effective move in terms of the propaganda machine. It is also an extension of the idiocy of the moment that we're living in, right? I mean, at the core of it, we're really talking about saving their lives. Right. But okay, if you want to die.
I mean, it's interesting because I look at Canada, I think, why Canada? Why didn't this happen here? And I immediately, you're an organizer, you've organized on the ground, you know very well what kind of dirty tricks Republicans play and how they tap into the fears of communities that may not even realize where these ideas are coming from or spreading to. But this is a workforce. Long haul trucking is dangerous. It's especially dangerous in the United States, which I'll get to in a second, just some information that folks may not know about long haul trucking. It's lonely, it's isolating, and simultaneously, you're on the open roads. But in Canada, there is obviously more of a left kind of, it doesn't mean that libertarianism doesn't exist and they don't fall for the same right-wing messaging. But I do find it very interesting that it didn't come from our right wing in the US, which is full of, organizing in this aspect. So I'm wondering if there's something geopolitical here, and if this is sort of like a strategy by the right to co-opt what seems to be a labor movement and channel energy not into, hey, we want better wages, we want fewer hours, we want more safety precautions or whatever, and really making it about we don't want to wear masks, right? Go storm our government, channeling that.
They're very effective. I think it is the propaganda, and I do think it is a strategic move more so than anything else, with one exception. I mean, I would say the truckers, they're probably listening to some of the same things, whether they're getting it over the internet or the radio. I mean, we do know that's truckers. That's where Rush Limbaugh did all his work. Right. I mean, those are long hauls. Those truck stops are lonely truck stops. They have to take showers at the truck stops, right? And in some cases, my colleague Rebecca, she actually worked at a facility, and it's so bad truckers die in their trucks. And so but that was a perfect breeding ground for the right. And now to see it move north of the border, I'm not surprised, because our media is internationalized now as well.
That's right. So I want to share some information that folks may not know about truckers that the New York Times published. It was interesting. So the supply chain disruption has reminded the world of the economic centrality of long haul trucking. I want to go back to that because free trade, I believe, has led to some of this. A lot of things that we fight against. The life of a driver hauling 53-foot trailers alone on open highways, thousands of miles a month, isn't for everyone. The typical long-haul tractor trailer driver registers 400 to 700 miles a day, or about 125,000 miles per year. That's enough to circumnavigate the globe 5 times. The typical driver works 60 to 70 hours a week, including time waiting to load and unload, while spending some 300 days a year on the road.
Yeah.
Only 7% of the between 300 and 500,000 so-called over-the-road truck drivers in the United States are women. And women tend to be better drivers. Just want to share that. Companies
no comment. I'm not touching that one.
I mean, we have better aim. I do know that as a fact. Like when it comes to sharpshooting and whatever, like arrows.
I thought you meant with like hitting us with the car. I thought when we say better aim, I was like, wait a minute, we just took an unexpected turn here.
With all weapons. Companies have sought to recruit more women whose numbers have increased in local driving jobs, but efforts to expand their ranks in long haul driving have confronted persistent sexism and sexual harassment. Also, let's be clear, like we know that women, tend to take on more of whether they want to or not, more of the family caregiving roles. And so it's not easy to just like abandon your family. Yeah. The median annual pay for tractor trailer drivers who are paid by the mile was $47,000 as of May 2020. Since then, firms have raised pay while dispensing bonuses up to $10,000 for a new hire. And trucks haul more than $10 trillion of American goods per year, or more than 70% of all of the products shipped in the United States. So there's lots of issues here, right? You have a workforce that's, a median of $47,000 a year for this type of work. Yeah. Is it protected? They're long hours. It's supposed to be highly regulated. It's really tough work, and you're not around your family, and you're on the road all the time, and 50 days off a year. It's tough, but it's also tough, the demands of it, especially with COVID, right? And how everyone was going on Amazon. A lot of the demands are because of our consumer economy that has been spread by globalism. Essentially, I don't want to use globalism because that's the word
key word. That's a key word for the right. But yeah, no, I'm with you though. I'm with you.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just curious how much of that, trillions of dollars is junk. Consumerism oftentimes does come down to junk that we end up throwing away. I'm sure there's all kind of life-saving things that truckers are. This is not to shine any negative light on the truckers, right? No. Because honestly, I do feel like they are taken advantage of. They are exploited. They are, this is where what you said resonated with me the most, Nomiki. They are spending this as if it is some type of solidarity amongst truckers. But the people they're spending it on behalf of, they're the people who are exploiting the truckers, right? And so you now have the truckers in solidarity with the very people who are exploiting them.
And that's the Republican strategy always. Yeah. Point the anger towards somebody who's not the enemy, but really stand in solidarity with us, channel their energy. It's like jujitsu. I always say this in movements.
Really,
movements have energy. How do you use that energy? Where do you direct it? Are you directing it at your ally over pettiness? Or are you directing it towards, the folks who are fighting for you? Or are you not really even like paying attention to what the actual issues are because of propaganda? I mean, that's what these propaganda echo chambers are. They're basically blocking out alternative information. I find this like a really interesting phenomenon, and the international component is odd to me also. Just given that Canada is supposedly our ally. All right, so I do want to pivot to this other point here. Nancy Pelosi has been under criticism for a long time because shocker, Congress is also pretty freaking wealthy. And I always find it fascinating when you find out there are these public servants who go to Congress and then somehow get richer on their salaries. How does that happen?
Did you say public servants?
Yeah. But some of this is there is a, they invest in stocks, and this is very complicated, obviously, because some people sit on the Financial Services Committee. Or the banking committees, and they might be privy to information, and they might share with their loved ones, and they make money. And there have been lawmakers on both sides who've gotten in trouble for this. Well, Nancy Pelosi, there's been a lot of criticism internally, even from her colleagues who probably want to replace her. Let's be clear, are you looking for an angle? And she admits that she would accept stock ban for lawmakers and judges, which is an interesting aspect. What do you think this will do?
You know, if they write it properly, it could keep them from profiting off of their inside knowledge. I mean, think about the allegations of the different Congress people who traded just in time for the pandemic because they had prior knowledge, right? And then a lot of times we see that they always find a way to skirt just enough along the lines of the law to not be held accountable. If they're serious about it, then they need to write a law that has some teeth with actual accountability, or else they'll circumvent this one too.
David brings up this point, and this is very smart, that they've been looking for spouse exceptions. So you said this law has to have enough teeth. There it is. I mean, she's notably married to somebody who does investment work and makes a lot of money. It's kind of like shocking that this is even allowed ethically. I mean, to the average person, this is like really shocking. But judges, I mean, judges too, like what?
You would think this is common sense. And shout out to John Ossoff from Georgia, who really kind of took the lead on at least some components of this and just took it, he stood out and said that, no, this is something that should not happen. So I'm not always on their side, but whenever they do good, that was good on him. And I think that has some impact here. Why
do you think he did that? Is there any sort of...
Because like you said, I think it's just pretty straightforward. The most inside information you're going to get outside of a corporation is going to be the insight committee, right? Just all the different committees that so much information is passing through. It is just common sense to anyone. So I don't know if he had an ulterior motive, but I'm with you. I think it's just common sense.
Well, and this reflects in policy too. So if you're literally invested in the stocks of a company, which is essentially you're part owner, like as a publicly traded company, are you going to pass laws that minimize profits in some way?
That's right.
Back unions that minimize profits.
Yeah. I mean, talk about racketeering at the end of the day. I mean, the information that flows through and the coordinated, like if there was real accountability, this would never have happened in the first place.
100%. And the fact that judges, I mean, David also brought up Stephen Donziger's case. I mean, this is Stephen Donziger, of course, the environmental lawyer who represented indigenous people in a case against Chevron, an oil spill. And he beat them, and it was $500 million, I believe, they're supposed to pay to the victims. And of course, Chevron has not paid it. And then they decided to file a bogus lawsuit against him. And the judge of that case and the independent prosecutor that was appointed by the judge all had direct financial ties to Chevron. What? What kind of justice system is this?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just open signs of decay of a dying empire. And it's almost like, do they not read or do they not care that they're literally living out their own? Anyway, they don't.
No,
care.
they don't. I don't know. I mean, this is why when you see them investing in how to live forever and building, penis rocket ships to space, literally coming back down from space and giving a speech about how they don't care about their workers and thank you to the workers who made this happen.
Right.
The same day that their Amazon facility collapses on workers and kills them. That's sociopathic. They're not living in reality.
And it's which is why I'm amazed when people cape for billionaires and try to say they throw their bodies in front of the bullets for the rhetorical bullets for Elon Musk and I'm like, do you guys not realize that these are the bad guys of the narrative? I mean, there's just no question about it, but here we are.
Okay, on that note, I know we didn't have this plan, but I just can't help but do this. But I've noticed this online lately from who knows whom. Folks who, at first they were saying with censorship with Joe Rogan, and I know you've been very vocal about this as I have for a long time.
Yeah.
And, kudos to Neil Young for using the power of capital against Joe Rogan and really making this a much more central argument. But Joe Rogan was caught saying the N-word a lot of times. A lot of times. And now what I've seen online, I'm sure you have too, is first off, a troll army just emerged out of nowhere with 2, 3, 5 followers. And it's ridiculous, but distracting from the conversation, trying to, challenge I'm sure they're doing it to you too. Challenge your
Absolutely.
your credibility. But they're now like, well, this isn't what you should be focused on. Don't you have to focus on the real work? I love how like the troll people are telling us about the real work, But okay, what's your take on this? Because I've seen some like sort of lefty folks use this.
It's pretty straightforward, guys. If we're not willing to fight fascism with some bare knuckles, you're not up to this fight. Let's be real. Joe Rogan is the top of the funnel for fascism. The algorithm is going to start you there, but by the time you're done, you're going to be with the what's that guy, Nick Fuentes. They take you from Benjamin Dixon to Fox News. Where do you think they're going to take you after you get done with it? And that's just the algorithm. I'm just talking about the real fight from the left. If we're talking lefty politics, and you're standing up for this guy who is spread, but then we have to remember there's a lot of leftists who are tied into the same misinformation that so-called leftists who are tied into the same misinformation around COVID-19. So of course therein lies their solidarity. Yep. So,
and look at this guy's, apology. It's like, but I look at it, you said the top of the funnel. That's so profound because he's just like a regular everyday guy, like a little comedian. And he had Bernie Sanders on. Like, what do you mean he's not a leftist? It's like, people aren't that dumb. People aren't buying these arguments. Like they make it sound like there's all these different arguments because they have some folks who echo them and who knows what their agendas are. But come on, man.
Yeah, no, and so that's the other half of it, right? This is actually, to me, very much a labor issue, right? Because if you're taking all the profits of the labor, this is an opportunity for the creators of the content to actually bear some fruits of their labor, and it's being redistributed to Joe Rogan.
There you go.
Come on, leftists, what the hell, man?
There you go. That's brilliant. That's exactly it. This guy, okay, if you're not upset about what he's saying, if you're not upset about his vaccine denial or him putting Alex Jones on, you know what you should just be upset about? He got $100 million. And how much have you made lately? How much of your money is going to actual artists?
That's right.
There you go. All right, Ben, I know you got to check on your kids. We might see you in a little bit later, but
I'm hoping so.
You
make sure they haven't destroyed anything. I'll be right back.
All right. We will be right back with Alexander Reid Ross. We're going to talk about the right and like how he predicted this all and what's happening and, what their game plan is. And are we there yet? We'll be right back after this quick break. I'm very excited. Our next guest is Alexander Reid Ross. He is an adjunct lecturer at Portland State University, and he is the author of the book Against the Fascist Creep. I can't say fascist creep. And he is he's sporting his Joe Rogan look today. What did you plan that?
I just wanted to apologize for the bad thing that I'll never repeat again.
Apology not accepted, but we will pretend that it didn't happen and say we're not censoring you, okay? Oh man, yes. Who wore it better? I think you wore it better because there's books in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the point of the bookshelf. I was trying to explain this to Joe before he critiqued my style, but he wouldn't listen.
The point of the bookshelf. So, all right. Okay, last time you were on, we noticed a little thing happening online where folks, it's been going on for about a couple months, folks who had once said that they were like on the left were suddenly like leading other well-meaning leftists into a direction of failure, to dead ends, attacking leftist leaders for not being leftist enough in Congress. I'm not even going to say the term that they were using. But then it kind of failed, and then it turned into another thing, and then another thing. And but the first hints of this were not with the force the you-know-what in Congress movement. They started much earlier, and I was very grateful to discover your work, and you broke it down for me. And it was like, I can't unlearn this. Now I see everything through the lens of the grand scheme of the great Steve Bannon and his best friends. So tell us, how does this whole ecosystem work? Just like that.
Well, like the thing is that Bannon was really the guy who was kind of cultivating the alt-right into the mainstream Republican Party using the Breitbart Forum. And this was really a turning point for the Republicans, which ushered in the kind of paleo-conservative Pat Buchanan populist wing, the so-called like pitchfork wing of the Republican Party, and ushered out the more kind of neoliberal trend that we'd seen in the Republican Party since really Reagan. And with Bannon really comes all this populism, right? So he'll appropriate all the economic criticisms that you'll see on the left of, inflation, real wages, the plight of the middle class, or the plight of the working class, he'll say, and then he'll direct it towards a nationalist policy in terms of economics and politics, international relations, foreign policy, and so forth. So that's kind of how his game works, and it does kind of draw from a long line of radical right politics that tends to dip into the fascist movement in order to provide cannon fodder for the sorts of private interests that he represents.
So there's this article that came out in the New York Times yesterday, and I sent it to everybody I knew, and I feel like it didn't get enough attention from anybody. And it was this piece that, and sometimes this happens in the New York Times, like where something really big comes out and no one really notices it. And then like 2 years later, some documentarian references it. It was an inspiration behind a documentary, but it took that long for it to turn into something. Erik Prince, who is like literally Dr. Evil. I mean, he is... I don't know what he drank as a child, because obviously it was something that happened in the home, because his sister is Betsy DeVos, of course. But right. Erik Prince helped raise money for a conservative spy venture to essentially infiltrate different groups, including leftist groups, including even center left Democratic parties. There was a donor aspect of this. It's been reported on in the past, but I immediately thought of kind of what's been going on in the left in diverting attention away from real movement work and labor work, and discrediting leftists who are trying to push people towards movement labor work, and discrediting them with attacks like you're a whatever. Like there's always an attack for something. Is this part of that, or is this sort of a different thing when you read this piece?
I mean, it has a lot of fascinating kind of aspects to it, especially the fact that this has been going on for something like 5 years. The person who he's sort of promoting with this is a former MI6 agent who has been infiltrating American Federation of Teachers in Michigan, Democratic campaigns on the small scale. So he's really been at this for a while. And also the involvement of Project Veritas is right. Sort of the crucial link here between Prince, this MI6 guy that he's promoting, and their efforts to run kind of stings against left-wing organizations, to infiltrate them, right? And so what we see here is a real counterintelligence strategy that, in a sense, is sort of privatized along with a lot of the military industry. So, it seems to be kind of dirty tricks operation that relies on millions of dollars in funding from people, including the Gore-Tex heiress mentioned in that piece about
Susan
Wyoming.
Gloria.
Yeah, as well as Project Veritas's own war chest of millions of dollars from apparently anonymous sources.
Yeah, anonymous sources. Interesting. So let's go back to Bannon, because can you help us understand, like, Bannon is working internationally and locally. Who are his web of folks, and simultaneously, how does that overlap with this anti-vax movement? Because there are populists around the world who are uniting around anti-vax, anti-COVID, anti-government response to COVID.
Yeah, so exactly. The crowd that Bannon keeps is really fascinating. I mean, he recently had episodes of his podcast War Room hosted by Jack Posobiec, for example, who used to go with the alt-right title before he changed his sort of tactics.
Yeah.
There's obviously former Trump advisors like Peter Navarro. There are anti-vaxxers and white nationalists associated with the anti-immigration Tantan Network, Numbers USA and those types of organizations. And, he kind of forms this node for all things populist and nationalist in a sense. So he develops real double binds wherever he goes, such that his enemies can't maneuver and he has all the freedom. And the perfect example of this is probably the COVID issue, because he continually presses. He says lying Democratic senators are lying about how the COVID pandemic is almost over. He's like, it's just begun. But then again, he's also fighting vaccines and he's fighting mask mandates. He's supporting the trucker convoy. Yeah, because he wants to he hates the Chinese Communist Party. And he wants to blame the Chinese Communist Party for the COVID pandemic, right? Because he has a particularly kind of a racist way of doing this. And he wants to stress the dangers of the pandemic while at the same time accusing the Democrats of ushering in a military dictatorship. And I think you find this a lot with these kinds of figures on the far right, and that's why it's so wild that he is such a public figure, is that they live in these fantasies of their own, creation, where they're the protagonists fighting against the world. And so for Steve Bannon, he very much is this underground revolutionary figure who's fighting off a Democratic Party military dictatorship system and attempting to liberate the working class. I don't think that he's necessarily false in his belief in that situation, but he is clearly a delusional man.
So he has done work in Europe. He had that monastery where he was trying to recruit, or I guess he did, to sway the EU elections. He was part of the Brexit. The campaign for Brexit with Nigel Farage, I can never say his name right. And then, and then of course, he just kept going, right? So the EU experiment wasn't successful, but it didn't mean that, like, the far right, that wasn't planting the seeds for more far right leaders to grow in power. Previously, you told us about how he had links to somebody who's very close, or at least at one point was very close with Putin. I'm curious a little bit more about that, Dugan. And I'm also curious about how Putin's new pact with China intersects with Bannon, because Bannon being so anti-China, how does this play into his political strategy at all?
It doesn't, but it does. I mean, he's a very opportunistic guy, so he's always trying to exploit, weaknesses in his enemy. That's the main point. The point for Bannon is attack. It's not have a, coherent position on anything. So with regards to China, I mean, Dugin teaches now. Alexander Dugin, an old traditionalist kind of Russian fascist guy. So he has by this point, years of links with China. He taught at a Chinese university for a while. I think he still does. And he wants to see this Eurasian landmass from Dublin to Vladivostok kind of develop out of discrete ethno-states based on authoritarian patriarchal forms, whether they be kind of Iranian theocracy or whether they be a more kind of clearly ideologically pure fascist structure. But for Bannon, since he hates China so much, he wants, and his whole sort of foreign policy revolves around great power competitions in order to win Russia over to the side of the United States and combat Chinese influence internationally. He can simply say that the recent sort of formation of deeper security ties between Russia and China is all Biden's fault, and that basically Biden has weakened the United States economy to the point where Putin is now forced to want to kind of be friends with Xi Jinping because, you know, America is no longer an option. It's basically a dying country, right? So he thinks this is, for him, this is the nightmare situation, the worst thing that could possibly happen. And it's all the Democrats' fault. So if you got somebody like Trump back into power, you know, the United States would regain its swagger and would be able to win Russia back against Ukraine.
Aha. Okay, so let's talk about Ukraine.
Oh, sorry. I meant against that was a slip against China. But yeah, Ukraine is another issue as well. Yeah.
So how does Ukraine overlap with this? I mean, in your other work, you've done a lot of work in terms of the environment, but this is clearly about oil, right?
Well, I mean, the specter of the Nord Stream 2 has certainly popped up, right? I mean, it seems that there a lot of this is about LNG supply to Europe and who controls it. So certainly a fossil fuels fiasco in one sense. In another sense, there's a very real ideological effort on Putin's side to kind of flex the muscles of Great Russia or Greater Russia to the muscles of Great Russia or Greater Russia to unite what they call Russian speakers under a kind of sovereign blanket or sphere of influence, right? So he can tell his people that he's working to reclaim the glory of Greater Russia, and that actually wins him a lot of support away from, you know,
locally.
Away from a lot of the dissent over lockdowns that have been pretty harsh in Russia. In the West, I think, you know, Ukraine is significant for a number of reasons, obviously, with regards to political geography and the fact that the United States and NATO in general seek to prevent the expansion of the Russian hegemony on the level that, you know, it was during the Soviet Union. But you're right, a lot of the reason for that lies in economic production rather than an ideological sort of affinity with freedom and democracy.
And of course, it's Putin's intent, as he said explicitly in multiple press conferences, even just yesterday, when he was there with Macron. His intent is to weaken and destabilize and maybe even break apart NATO, which of course is his who's holding him accountable. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of folks who rightfully so question NATO for a lot of mishandlings and I mean, yes, of course, like every institution basically out of last century is broken and not perfect.
Yeah.
Anything that neoliberals have touched. But to say that it shouldn't exist is like saying the UN shouldn't exist. Like,
it's a little bit of a, you know, it's a tough spot, right? Because the existing framework is in a deadlock and nobody knows an appropriate way out. They only know all of the problems as they currently exist. So,
right.
You know, it's one thing to contemplate innovative solutions and quite another to set them into place. and doing so during a period of diplomatic crisis such
That's
as
right.
we're in is perhaps reckless.
To say the least, yeah. Really interesting. Okay, so what's likely to happen? I mean, if you see the far right continuing to grow, and obviously we have elections coming up this year, is this spreading or is it being contained? Like, where are we in terms of this far right? It's so hard to see with Ukraine right now, and to see really how powerful is this real? Is it something? Is Putin really succeeding at his strategy, and working with the far right in the U.S. to do so? Is it actually succeeding or failing? I'm very confused at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the question. It's sort of anybody's game at this point. There are so many problems right now. The world is definitely in a crisis on this scale that I don't know if we've really experienced since the United States started the war in Iraq. There are so many different things that could happen between now and the elections. So, you know, it's not, I'm not pessimistic about the current situation, but I'm also, you know, I wouldn't call myself an optimist at all. I think that, you know, you talk about Bannon. I mean, their strategy has been kind of frighteningly successful thus far, of just sort of like attempting to take over election boards, of bullying teachers, of bullying doctors, and really kind of trying to assert their agenda, such as it is, even if all it really counts for is a kind of a power, you know, grab. So I think, you know, the left needs a valid response that goes beyond a sort of, well, we're the ones who are trying to keep this country together, you know, because that's nice and all. It's good behavior, but it's not necessarily going to win elections, right? So on the one hand, there are processes of accountability that are currently in place, right? We're talking about the arrest of significant oath keepers, the arrest of leading Proud Boys. Here in Portland, the jail sentence for the violent far-right activist Alan Swinney. So there are, it would appear, consequences down the pipe. And if those consequences don't work out, if the January 6th committee basically, you know, derails or simply falls flat, then we're going to be moving further and deeper into the crisis, because the only thing that reactionaries understand is consequence, and there just haven't been any.
I want to close with this because you may have seen that Mike Pence finally said something about the January 6th riots and terrorist attacks, is what I'm calling them. He said something, and this is, you know, I think a couple days after the RNC, the Republican Party, not only decided to side with the insurrectionists, but wants to censor both Cheney, Representative Cheney, and Kinzinger for basically defying their party in really, you know, probing and investigating, partly because, let's be clear, there were members of Congress who were in cooperation in communicating with those who were organizing on the outside in the riots. So there's been a little bit of a showdown between Bannon and Mike Pence. Let's put that up there.
Said I had
There we go.
overturn the election. President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election. And Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
That's quite a pivot. Okay. And of course, Steve Bannon has a response.
Pence, you're gonna carry this thing eventually to your grave, okay? Because it is a mark of shame, and you are a stone cold coward. A stone cold coward. Boris Epstein. We're going to start with numbers and analysis, and then this thing broke this afternoon. My head's blown up. So Boris, you got to help me out here, brother. I can't take Pence, and I can't take Pence and Mark Short and all these Koch guys up there ratting out Trump up on Capitol Hill right now.
What?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't even care about Boris. Like, forget about that. So I have a theory on this. Only if a couple things happen. I think the Republicans who have been trying to keep their party alive are probably thinking this is a little bit too far, and that this is the kind of situation where even if Joe Biden doesn't do anything strategic on his campaign, which shocker he probably won't, and that the Senate Democrats and DCCC, they're not going to run the most strategic campaigns. It might be a wave because there are going to be so many normie Republicans, whatever those are, who are so disgusted by the fact that they're standing by the insurrectionists that it might turn in a different direction, which is why I just keep telling people, yo, just run at the local level. If you're a union member, if you're a woman, just run, because these are those kinds of years where a wave happens. Obviously, if you can run, if you're able to. I don't want to be, I want people to understand that it takes a lot of sacrifice. But if you're thinking about it, if you have the ability to, they need opponents, and the Democratic Party is doing so little to recruit, literally almost zero, that some school bill members that are insurrectionists might get in there because they don't have opposition. So if you just run, and if you can afford to do an ad showing the Republican Party, backing the insurrectionists, it's going to backfire. That's my theory, because this is ridiculous. This is Pence, trying to preserve maybe his political future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely. I don't know what Pence's motivation is. Maybe he is trying to preserve his own political future in a field that he sees changing in in the direction that you're talking about, right? So it could be a good sign in that sense. On the other hand, he's speaking to the Federalist Society. He could just be vaunting himself and sort of patting himself on the back for his own decision, which fine. I mean, he was the one who put the nail in the coffin of Trump's plan, regardless of his efforts to bring in everybody from Homeland Security to the NSA to whoever. At the same time, I see the far right getting together and trying to do a trucker caravan here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And Bannon's 100% behind this. Fox News is already starting to promote it. So, it seems like that is likely planned for sometime in March. So that could have kind of a pretty big impact on people's perceptions of where the GOP stands. We'll see what the truckers get up to.
Hopefully there's some leftist truckers out there who remind their colleagues that, the masks aren't the enemies. And by the way, they might not even, the pandemic that might not even be a thing anymore. I'm knock on wood, I shouldn't say that. But it's actually your wages and your long hours. And so maybe think about unionizing instead. Yeah, hey, I don't know. We'll see.
There's power in the union.
There is. It's always our weapon, right? Fascinating conversation. This isn't going away anytime soon, so I'd love to have you back on. Always good to speak to the expert on the far right and how they're organizing and strategizing and where they're going. Alexander Reid Ross, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nomi Keith. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, enjoy your Sharknado coffee.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, take care. And to everybody else, we have some shout outs to do before we wrap up today. We have some new patrons. Craig Z, thank you. Erik M, John A, and Carlos C. Love this energy. Thank you for joining us, patrons. And some super chats. Let me, if I can read this. Big Olameo. Thank you so much for your incredibly kind contribution. Says, the days are getting worse. Glad that David and Ben are here to keep me from sliding into the despair abyss. Thanks, guys. Left is best. Indeed it is. And Gabe, thank you for your love. And on Twitch, we've got Platinum Ninja. Thanks for joining. Oh gosh, I can't see. It's my glasses, guys. I'm getting old, okay? Umar H. Sories, thank you. You've been subscribed for 6 whole months. Really grateful to you. And Nug Wrangler resubscribed, been subscribed for 13 months. We know you, Nug Wrangler. And then Pagan Communist resubscribed. Thank you so much. It's been a year. Platinum Ninja cheered 100 bits. Thank you. And Bad Bunny. What's up, Bad Bunny, rating us? Thank you, Bad Bunny. We love you. Love to everybody else for joining us. If you're not a patron already, this is where we support each other. It's a hard world out there for independent leftist media, and people ask, like, how are you able to produce this show? Someone asked in our comments the other day, and it's because of our patrons. And really, the ecosystem has changed a lot since the Trump election, but our patrons have really kept the show going, and we have an incredible patron community. We are so grateful for your support. If you used to be a patron, if you had a cutback, please email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will find a way to make it work. If you can afford to go to a higher level, that helps pay for the other patrons who may have to take some time off. Super grateful. We start, let's scroll that screen back up. We start at $5 a month. And then you can go all the way up and you get, swag, whether it's stickers, mugs, a tote bag. You get special patron privileges and interviews. So thank you to everybody. Go check us out at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And we will see you on Friday for Femme Friday. Stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed. Everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.